The sunlight had barely begun to spill across the marble floor when billionaire CEO Cassian Vale made a decision that would quietly change his entire life. Lying perfectly still on the long leather sofa in his luxurious living room, he pretended to be asleep, determined to discover whether the shy maid everyone praised was truly kind, or simply pretending because she worked for him. But what he saw through his barely opened eyes left him completely frozen. The woman he had barely noticed for months was standing beside his table, looking at something that had nothing to do with money, power, or herself. And within minutes, Cassian realized he had been testing the wrong person all along. Before we continue, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life, please like this story, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Midnight Tales. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Cassian Vale was 38 years old and known throughout the city as a ruthless businessman who could turn a struggling company into a fortune within a few years. His name appeared in magazines, financial reports, and business headlines, but very little was known about the men behind the expensive suits. He lived alone in a magnificent house surrounded by gardens, tall windows, and carefully maintained rooms that always looked perfect but never felt like home. After losing his parents years earlier and experiencing a painful betrayal from someone he had once trusted completely, Cassian had slowly convinced himself that people only came close when they wanted something from him. Then came Maribel Rowan, a quiet young maid with a gentle personality and an unusual habit of disappearing whenever there was an argument in the house. She never demanded attention. She never complained about the long hours. She always finished her work carefully and left each room warmer and cleaner than she had found it. Cassian had noticed that she sometimes looked exhausted, but whenever he asked if something was wrong, she simply lowered her eyes and insisted that everything was fine. One bright summer morning, Cassian returned home unexpectedly after canceling a business meeting. He found the house unusually quiet. His assistant had warned him that Maribel had been working since early morning, so Cassian decided to rest on the sofa while reviewing some documents. But an idea entered his mind. He remembered seeing her quietly placing food into a small container before leaving work the previous evening. He wondered whether she was secretly taking things from the house. The suspicion embarrassed him, but instead of asking her directly, he decided to test her. Cassian placed a valuable envelope containing several $1,000s on the coffee table, then stretched out on the sofa and closed his eyes. He controlled his breathing and pretended to fall asleep. He expected Maribel to enter, notice the money, and perhaps take it when she thought no one was watching. A few minutes later, he heard soft footsteps. Maribel entered carrying a basket of freshly folded towels. She paused when she saw him sleeping. Instead of walking away, she quietly placed the towels down and began cleaning the room. Cassian waited for the moment she would notice the envelope. Eventually, she did. He felt his body tense beneath the blanket. Maribel stared at the money for several seconds. Cassian expected her hand to reach toward it. Instead, she looked toward him, then quickly picked up the envelope and placed it farther away from the edge of the table. She seemed worried that it might fall onto the floor. Cassian almost opened his eyes. Then Maribel noticed something else. A small photograph had slipped from Cassian's wallet and fallen beneath the table. She knelt down, picked it up carefully, and looked at the picture. It showed Cassian as a child standing between his parents, smiling beneath the bright afternoon sun. The powerful CEO who appeared cold to the world looked completely different in that photograph. Maribel gently wiped a small layer of dust from the frame and placed it beside the other family photographs on the shelf. Then she noticed the envelope again. She picked it up and carried it toward the hallway. Cassian's suspicion returned. But instead of hiding it, Maribel placed the money inside a drawer near his desk, then wrote a small note explaining where she had found it. She had been afraid that someone might accidentally leave it where it could be lost. Cassian felt ashamed. Yet the biggest surprise had not happened. Maribel walked into the kitchen and returned carrying a small paper bag. She placed it beside the envelope. Cassian could hear the faint sound of coins moving inside. Maribel had apparently been saving her own money. She opened the bag and carefully counted a handful of coins and a few worn banknotes. Then she looked at the photograph of Cassian's parents again. Cassian remained perfectly still, watching through the smallest opening between his eyelashes. Maribel had discovered from another employee that Cassian had recently been visiting the cemetery on the anniversary of his mother's death. She knew he rarely ate breakfast on those mornings and often worked until late at night. Without telling anyone, she had bought a small bouquet of flowers with her own money. She placed the flowers beside the photograph. Cassian's chest tightened. This woman had not taken his money. She had spent her own. And she had done it for a man who had barely ever thanked her. Maribel stood there for a moment, looking at the photograph with quiet sadness. She whispered a prayer for Cassian's parents and then gently pulled a blanket over him because the air conditioner was making the room cold. That simple act broke something inside him. Cassian suddenly remembered every time he had walked past her without greeting her, every time he had assumed her silence meant weakness, and every time he had judged people before giving them a chance. He had wanted to test whether she was honest, but she had unknowingly tested his own character instead. When Maribel turned to leave, Cassian finally opened his eyes. She froze. Her face became pale when she realized he had been awake. Cassian sat up slowly and looked at the flowers, the envelope, and the little bag containing her own savings. For the first time in years, the wealthy CEO had no clever words and no business strategy to hide behind. He simply felt embarrassed. Maribel tried to explain that she had only wanted to make sure everything was safe, but Cassian stopped her with a gentle expression. He understood now that she had never been interested in his wealth. Over the following weeks, Cassian began noticing things he had ignored before. He discovered that Maribel worked 2 jobs because she was helping pay for her younger brother's education. He learned that she often skipped lunch so she could send more money home. He discovered that she had once dreamed of becoming a nurse but had abandoned that dream after her family fell into financial trouble. Cassian quietly changed her life. He arranged for her education to continue, but he did not present it as charity. He offered her a scholarship through one of his company's community programs and allowed her to choose whether she wanted to accept it. Maribel eventually returned to school while continuing only part-time work at the house. But the greatest change happened inside Cassian. The mansion that had once felt like a museum slowly became a home. He began eating breakfast at the table instead of working through every meal. He started visiting his parents' graves without pretending he was too busy to feel anything. Most importantly, he stopped measuring people by their clothes, salaries, or social status. Months later, on another beautiful summer morning, Cassian stood in the garden while Maribel prepared to leave for class. He looked at her and realized that the shy maid he had once tested had become the person who taught him the most important lesson of his life. True wealth was never about what a person owned. It was about what they were willing to give when nobody was watching. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Midnight Tales for more stories about love, humanity, and second chances. And before you go, special request, comment kindness below if you believe that a good heart is worth more than all the money in the world. Because sometimes, the person we overlook is the person carrying the greatest gift of all, not wealth, not fame, and not power, but a heart that remains kind even when nobody is watching.